Thanks for joining us today on Leadership Log, which is a podcast for the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center community on topics of interest. And topic of interest today is learning about our history office. So we're going to meet our two AFLCMC historians. We'll start with Kevin. Sir, if you could introduce yourself and give us a little of your career background.
Thanks, Daryl. I appreciate the introduction. So I'm the new guy in the office, as it were, but not new to the Air Force program. So some of my background, I'm a University of Dayton graduate in history, and I did my graduate work at Georgia Tech down in Atlanta and specialized in the history of technology. And ever since I was a kid, I was always very interested in aerospace technology, NASA and the Air Force, all of those things. So I very much focused in that area my entire career. And I was lucky enough to start my career through some internships at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. So as you can imagine, that was a pretty fabulous place to be with astronauts and mission control and all those historic things. And they were still running the space shuttle program at the time. And so I spent about 5 years down there before taking a job with the Air Force in its history program. I moved up to the Air Force Research Laboratory, or AFRL, up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in the early 2000s, and spent the better part of 18 years there as a historian, doing all the history of the Air Force's science and technology, all the cool things we've been doing for over a century up there. But then recently I was offered the opportunity to come down to LCMC and join the team there. And so that seemed like a pretty cool gig. So rather than doing science and technology, we're doing the other side, the acquisition and sustainment piece of things. And so it seemed like a new and exciting challenge for me. So I decided to test those waters, and I've been down here for just over a month now, and kind of trying to jump in feet first and all that. But pretty cool stuff. I'm getting to read about the development of all these airplanes and things that I had pictures of on my wall when I was a kid. So, what's more fun than that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, welcome to the team. And Jason?
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. I'm Jason Engel. I am a historian, obviously, in the AFLCMC history office. I came to the Air Force via actually just it's kind of a funny story type of situation where I made friends with Ray Ortenzi in AFMC history office, and him and Yancey Males kind of ended up bringing me on in a term position first, and an opportunity opened up in LCMC, and I was fortunate enough to kind of get that opportunity. But yeah, I came there. I met them after I finished my doctorate at Southern Miss, where I focused on modern European history, and mainly World War I, World War II era, interwar period history of mainly military history and paramilitary organizations, stuff like that in the interwar period. So that's kind of in a roundabout way, my story. So.
So tell us a little bit about the team. I mean, is there more than just the two of you? How big is the team? And specifically, why does the unit have a history office? What's the purpose? What role do you guys play?
Well, if as the saying goes, what you see is what you get. Jason and I are the team right now. Back in the good old days, they had more people back when they were separate centers before LCMC was created. But in the modern Air Force, the two of us have a lot to cover for the whole organization. It's not to say we couldn't use some more help, but right now we two people is what we have, and so we're trying to make do with that. And I think we're doing a good job so far. Jason's been doing a fantastic job down there while he was manning the shop by himself for a while. But so it's just the two of us. And so what do the two of us do? Why do we need a history office? Your question's basically, well, recently one of my first tasks here, I had to write a mission statement for the history office, which kind of summarizes what I see kind of the vision for what we do and what we the role we play within the larger organization. And if you'll excuse my reading off the script here, but this is what we have. Our job is to educate, advise, and inspire leadership and the workforce through the professional research, collection, preservation, analysis, writing, and dissemination of AFLCMC's history and heritage. So lots of words in there, but basically that, all those verbs in there, kind of say the different pieces of our job. So I can just break that down a little bit. So, everything starts with research, and that means, historical research, digging into our archives or archives elsewhere, pinging our fellow historians across the Air Force program and other organizations to get information about our unit's history. Then we collect that. We save these things in our archives, and now there's a big push to digitize everything. So we're building a digital archive that we can not only use ourselves, but share with a wider audience as well within the Air Force History program. And hopefully someday, with the public and those sorts of things, as within given limitations. We also preserve that. We make sure that documents, whether they were generated, a year ago or 100 years ago, are professionally cared for in the archives and maintained, so that future generations of historians and researchers will have that material to work from. Analysis. Well, this is when we really get into the historic part. Well, we don't just collect this information; we use it. What can we learn from it? So we might look at a dozen documents. We might look at 100 documents to try to make some sense of our history in a particular time period or on a particular topic, depending on what our subject matter is. It might be that the commanders asked us to answer a question, or we've gotten an inquiry from outside where somebody needs to know something. So we'll use all of that material that we've researched and collected to provide some level of analysis for them. And so, yes, we will provide that information, but we also write our own histories. Every year, the unit is required to put out an annual history, and the Air Force does this across the board. This is a requirement for every center, every wing. Every organization of a certain size is required to put out an annual history, and therefore have a historian there. And the Air Force is really, I think, progressive in this sense. We're the only military service that does it this way, and I think the service really benefits from having these historians recording that history as we go. But we'll gather this information, we'll write it up in some sense, or we'll do special studies that we'll write histories on these topics, like I mentioned, or, to provide a paper for our leadership, or, whatever, whoever's, requiring it. Might be Congress, it might be somebody at the Air Force level. We have a lot of different people interested in what we do. And so we try to provide the historical service to all of these. And then, as I said, the final piece is dissemination. It's how can we get this historical information out there? We're not hoarders. We're not just trying to gather all this for ourselves and, keeping it to ourselves, but it's, how can we get this out there? How can we educate a wider audience on our mission, on what our mission has done and what our contributions have been to the Air Force for, decades and decades, and, what we're contributing to today. And then the final piece is this other bit that some people often ask about. It is what we call heritage. There's a difference between history and heritage. History is kind of this analysis, this understanding of the past, and heritage is more this knowing what we did and using that to, for what I said, to inspire our leadership and our workforce to be proud of where we came from, what our predecessors have done, how we've contributed to the national security of the United States. And so we do those pieces, and that might involve contributing to displays in a hallway, or things like this where we're talking to public affairs or social media or the newspaper, where we're sharing this information about our past. And so that's also a big chunk of what we do, and probably the most popular. In fact, people always like to know these cool tidbits about our past, the cool leaders and important people from our past. And so, we try to get that out as much as possible and get people interested in our history and be proud of the organization that they're involved with. And, that hopefully helps build our morale and the productivity and all those sorts of things for the organization. So Jason, what did I miss?
I think no, you did an excellent job of covering all that. I mean, we cover a lot of bases that I think a lot of the organization doesn't realize, and that's kind of what I think is going to be our big rock, so to speak, is to get out and kind of touch base with these organizations and, different directorates within the center and kind of have them get to know us, what we're doing, why we are, wanting to either sit in on their meetings or why we are wanting to get documentation from them, what the reasoning is, because, it's understandably they're kind of reticent to say, hey, can you send me all this documentation? I want to, we want to record this, but when we explain to them, what we're doing and why we need it, they're typically they're more than happy to share it with us. But yeah, it's getting out that message of this is what we're here for, this is what we're doing. We're trying to help your future selves have documentation from the past. And so, a lot of research requests are that, well, they did this, back in the 60s. How did they do it? What was the process that they went through to, what did that acquisition process look like, for example? So if we have that stuff, we can kind of go back and dig out the documentation and, and put together something for them that will hopefully be practical and useful. But if we don't have it, that's we're going to be, we're going to be telling them, well, it'd be nice. I wish I could help you, but we don't have anything to give you. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
Sometimes that firsthand account of actually being in meetings. So in public affairs, we run into the same problem. Sometimes we want to just sit in on meetings so that we can get kind of the details, in the moment, and people are kind of confused as to why we need to be there, But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, you guys both bring up a great point. One that Daryl had initially asked that I kind of skipped over, and that was kind of the origins of the program. And this really goes back to really the World War II era, and it's pretty cool. One of our colleagues had just recently sent out a mission report where during World War II, you actually had historians riding inside bombers on bombing missions to kind of record what was going on there. I mean, these guys were out there in combat, doing real-time history because they were embedded with these units and recording their unit history. And you saw that throughout the Army, really. And so that's kind of the outgrowth. The Air Force sees that value in having historians with their units and understanding what is going on, not just in an operational sense, but back at places like, what was Wright Field, but is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where so much activity is going on that, you have to have somebody there who really has their fingers in the pie, so to speak, to really understand that kind of the culture and the activities and really be there firsthand to record, what's really happening. So you're not just left with trying to reconstruct everything from, documents that might be, years and years old, and you're not getting the quote unquote real story. So there's a tremendous value in having historians, out there and involved. And that's something that I've always been very big on, whether that was, at NASA or at AFRL and now LCMC, is, getting out there. We're not an ivory tower, all right? We're not going to do our job very well if all we do is sit in our office and try to have people send us stuff. We need to get out there and talk to the people who are doing the real jobs out there, get to know people and collect things from them and really understand how our organization functions. And obviously with COVID, that's a little bit harder than it used to be. And but hopefully we can go back to that sort of mindset, and Jason and I can get out to all of the the LCMC units that are spread throughout the country. I mean, it's not just a one location kind of thing. So it's how can we get ourselves involved with all of these organizations, and how can these organizations get to know us better so that we can help them do their job and they can help us do ours. It's really this kind of great symbiotic relationship once we get those walls broken down and are able to do that.
Mm-hmm. So you bring up a great point, and I'd like to go into that a little bit. This center is located across a number of locations, major operating locations in the U.S., but a number of them even worldwide. How much does that complicate your job trying to stay engaged with some of these other locations when if you're physically located here at Wright Pat? how do you keep on top of things that are going on at Hanscom or Gunter or Tinker or Hill or any of these other locations that we were at?
Yeah, I think I'll let Jason field this one since he's been doing it a little longer than I am, and I'll tag on my thoughts at the end after he's had a chance to say something more meaningful about it.
No, I mean it's a challenge for sure. Especially with the manpower kind of limitations, in the office. We've had it's been kind of off and on a 1- and 2-man shop for like the last, I believe, 5 or 6 years.
Mhm.
And prior to that, as Kevin kind of alluded to, in the heyday of the Aeronautical Systems Center, they had maybe 4 to 6 or 4 full-time historians, and then they typically had either some reservists or active duty, enlisted folks helping them, or interns, kind of a couple of auxiliary positions to support the history production process and collection and heritage and all that stuff. It makes it hard when there's just a couple of us to kind of get our heads around everything that's going on. And so it's kind of a constant effort of, kind of checking every day and every weekly, what's happening over here, what's going on at its location. And, and for that matter, it's hard to, myself having only been here in the center for 1.5 years, it's still kind of hard for me at this point even to wrap my head around kind of everything that the center has its hands in, because it is such a vast and complex organization that it's something that takes a while. I'm talking, and why when I say a while, I mean years, to really kind of get a grasp on, even a basic grasp on all the things that are happening, not only at Wright-Patterson, but then also, at the 9 other or 8 other operating locations, I believe that LCMC's at.
Yeah, for sure. The sheer size of the organization is really a giant hurdle. There's, with just 2 of us, as Jason said, we can't really grab everything, and it's the proverbial, we're seeing a lot of forest and not many trees, just because we don't have the ability, being 2 people, we don't have the man hours to really delve into everything, much less really get a good grasp on everything that's going on at every level within LCMC. And so that's something that we're having to work around all the time. I mean, it's a challenge for us, but we realize that going into it, that's what it is. So, how can we make that work? And in that sense, COVID is both obviously it's a big curse, but it's also a blessing in a sense that so many people are getting used to things like this, where everything's done remotely now anyway. So your physical location doesn't matter as much as it might have, a year or 1.5 years ago. You could, whereas before, needing to go and sit down with somebody was kind of a prerequisite to breaking down those barriers I mentioned. But now people are used to doing Zoom calls or, everything via email or, all these different kind of virtual mechanisms. So I think that sort of familiarity with these tools is helping us to branch out a little bit, and will help us branch out, once we've gotten some things out of the way and have more time to really delve into getting out to all these locations virtually or physically. And so I guess, that could be seen as a good thing, or, trying to find the good out of this whole bad situation. But it is still tough. It's by no means easy. But, we just have to do the best we can. In my case, since I've only been here a month, I've been spending a lot of time trying to read about all the organizations and what we've been doing and all the different programs. But, there's just so many, you can't really get a grasp of all the details in any meaningful sense, certainly not within, a few weeks, and probably not within a few years. But this is where historians, can be valuable. There's a tendency in the program for people to stay in the program and stay at locations for a long time. And so you develop this kind of corporate memory and this good understanding of what was happening. And as I mentioned before, I was up at AFRL for over 18 years. So, I kind of knew things up there inside and out, and, that was really helpful. And so, now I'm back at the beginning of that cycle, but that's the same sort of familiarity I'm trying to build up here, and hopefully can offer that level of expertise sooner than later as well. But yeah, it's a challenge, and I think we're going to be constantly facing, and hopefully we do the best we can with it.
Yeah, and I will say this too, if I can, real quick. I think that's where it's going to be really important for us to be able to get the buy-in of the different directorates and divisions and operating locations and stuff like that, to kind of clue us into what they're doing, include us on distributions of either weekly kind of activity updates or meeting notices, so we can kind of, like I said, stick our nose in there and kind of hear what's going on. And so it's kind of one of those things that I think that we're going to have to continue to try to work with everyone, to kind of remind us, hey, we're here, please keep us in the loop, because we want to know what you guys are up to, so we can record all of this.
Yeah, I know for us, we're constantly looking for stories to find out news things that are coming out of the organizations. And so it's like building personal relationships with people. You've got to get these kind of like people that you talk to, you exchange emails with them and tell them, hey, look, if something's coming along, or if you hear something, about a story idea, shoot it to me and let me know. And a lot of times we get a lot of great leads that way. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would second that. And like Jason was saying, it's really important for us to get our names and faces out there to the organization so they understand that A, we have a history office, and B, we're serving a vital function of the organization. And finally, C, we can only do our job if they help us do our job. And, I like to, refer to myself or the team as, your friendly neighborhood historian. We're not here trying to, catch you at something, or, trying to figure out, we're not the inspector general or something. We're trying to, record these activities, for posterity. So, the people who are doing their jobs now, their stories are going to be important to people 10 years or 50 years from now. And if we don't get that information, if we don't record that, then that stuff's going to be completely lost. I mean, there are so many great stories I know that exist from, decades past that have been lost just because there wasn't an interview done, or the documents are no longer there, or whatever. And I just know it exists because of, one bit of information or one picture or something like that. And wow, I wish somebody had, really recorded this better at the time. And, I don't want us to fall into that boat here where, future historians are kicking themselves because we didn't do our jobs well. So, for us to do our jobs, we need everybody else to help us out. And so hopefully we can get our message out, and people can know that we're here, and we're here to do right by them and their activities.
So one other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about were patches. Okay, so a lot of times organizations stand up, new organizations come along, and in LCMC programs come and go all the time. And one of the first things they invariably do is somebody designs a patch. They have a logo or something like that. Which I get is separate from heraldry. Okay, so like you guys deal with actual unit heraldry, like the actual registered insignias and that kind of thing. But these patches there's a relationship with that as well. So explain to me a little bit about kind of how that works. What is your involvement with it? And then how do you get involved, or do you get involved in like some of these unit designed logos and things?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because quite frankly, we get more questions about this than probably anything else. And you really hit the nail on the head. There's kind of a dichotomy here. And this falls under what the Air Force calls lineage and honors. And that's a very kind of formal, regulated activity within the Air Force. And this is something militaries have been doing for centuries, whether it's knights wearing insignia on their shield or something like that, so they can recognize each other in battle. To bomber crews wearing a patch on their jacket, whatever it might be. This is something that's been going on for a long time. And so the Air Force, like you said, sees this kind of two ways. There's the kind of official side, and then there's the unofficial side. The official side is really what's the province of the History Office, and this is where we can really help. These are the unit emblems and conversely the patches that go along with those emblems that are for what we call Air Force constituted units, AFCONs. That means that, an organization that's, not a subunit of an organization, but one that's constituted, for lack of a better word, as a specific kind of independent organization. And so that's usually what you see in Air Force terminology. It might be a squadron or a wing or a center. It's not a directorate or a division, a branch, anything like that. So there's specific ones that exist, and LCMC has more than a handful of these. But these official organizations are allowed to have official emblems, and these have a process. These have guidelines that they have to follow in order to have an emblem approved. And so LCMC has one. The like Air Base Wing has one. All the actual units, the AFCON units, have their own, and they've gone through this process where they can only use specific colors. They can only have so many what they call elements, or the different design pieces in them. They have to be in the shield with the scroll work. They get approved through the History Office and through higher headquarters and what they call the Institute of Heraldry. So there's this long, really, and sometimes it's a multi-year process of getting this done. So that's, like I said, very formal and very regimented. And pretty much all of our units that are eligible for that have gone through that process or are in the midst of that process of getting those. So most of the new things that are standing up now, or if there's a reorganization, don't qualify for that. If you have a question about it, of course, you can ask the History Office, hey, do we qualify for one of these? But like I said, in general, if you're an administrative organization of some sort, like I said, these directorates or divisions, branches, sections, groups, offices, all those kinds of things don't count. So where does that leave them? That leaves them on the unofficial side. And by instruction, the Air Force, the History Offices are supposed to more or less stay out of that because it's not an official function. And this is what we tell people. Well, those kind of unofficial emblems, what they might call morale patches, are exactly what you said. Those are for team building, for camaraderie, morale. It's, hey, my office, there's half a dozen of us, we want to wear something cool on our shoulder, or put this, patch on this emblem on the wall or on our letterhead, saying, XYZ directorate, and have some cool pictures, or, in a Latin motto of some sort. Great, have at it. You're allowed to do those things, and the History Office doesn't have any say in that. But per recent guidelines, the Air Force is very sensitive about people including anything that could be seen as somehow offensive or exclusionary in some sense. And so, I would definitely keep that in mind for those people that are contemplating such things. Even though we can't say officially one way or the other, that's something that they need to keep in mind. But, all we can tell people is that, those can't be used in place of like an official patch or an emblem, and things that actually require the higher units one. And that's something that isn't the job of the History Office. We're not what they call the patch police. We're not going around telling people, well, you're wearing the wrong patch. You got to go put this one on. That's a different organization within each unit. That's not our job. But yeah, essentially we handle all the official ones. And a big part of our job in recent years has been what they've called the OCP conversion, this operational camouflage pattern, where they're going from the old colors of camouflage uniform to these the new ones, the OCP. And so all of the emblems have been going from their kind of full color one to these 4-color kind of greens and browns, this muted one to match the uniform. And so all of the units have had to go through this process, and it's taken years and it's still ongoing. Not all of LCMC's units have theirs yet, and there are still many across the Air Force that haven't done it. But that's been a big piece of our activity recently, is shepherding that process, and that is something that the Air Force history offices do. It's not just an LCMC thing. So that's been keeping us busy. But yeah, like I said, we get asked about this kind of stuff all the time. And if this podcast answers that question for some people proactively, great. But like I said, if you have any questions about it, we're happy to answer it. It's something we get quite often, and it's an easy one for us to field. So
I know from a from a PA perspective, one of the things that we always look for in these patches is whether or not there's any copyright infringements included in them. And every so often we'll get a patch that someone will use, Batman wings or something like that, that we're technically not allowed to do. And but again, those patches are all intended in good fun. And I think most people approach them that way. Jason, anything to add on the heraldry of the patches, or?
No, I mean, like Kevin said, we get those questions a lot from as the AFI refers to them as non-units, which we have to kind of tell them, okay, we are not eligible for an official emblem, but you can create your own morale patch, and I usually give them a copy of the AFI just so they have for their own reference, and we. Sometimes they'll bring them to us and we'll look at them. And, I always try to kind of ask or tell them to kind of keep in mind what the AFI does say in terms of heraldry, and who knows, maybe someday they'll change it to allow them to have recognized emblems of some sort. And if they do, then you might as well position yourself to have something ready to go. I don't know, but it's, of course it's up to them, and that's not something that we, like Kevin said, that we police. So, yeah, I mean, it's up to them what they do, and, we'll help them with unofficial kind of questions or anything like that we can, especially anything from a historical perspective, that might help them in that process. But as far as guiding it through, there's nothing that we can really do for them in that regard. So,
can you help with any Latin translations, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can look at Google Translate.
My old colleagues up at
to help them there.
One of my old colleagues up at AFRL spoke and read Latin fluently, and so he was always our go-to if somebody wanted a Latin phrase converted, because it's not just a word-for-word sort of translation. There's syntax and all those sorts of things, and obviously a lot of modern sayings don't quite translate into Latin, so you've got to do some fudging there to get the right idea across. But
yeah. So, we talked a little bit about kind of tracing the lineage of this organization as far as its mission. And I think there's an appetite within the organization, and even beyond, to learn some about acquisition programs from the past, and the way those programs were done, and then some of the unique individuals that led those programs back in that time, And a lot of those stories, I think, haven't really been well told. Kevin, you mentioned AFRL. AFRL, I think, has done a really good job of telling the stories of the pioneers in STEM and in science and technology. Some of the people who worked in AFRL. LCMC, I think, has a lot of those same individuals. Some of these mavericks, and those are great stories, I think, that we really need to explore. So. What do you guys think about that? And what are some ways you think that we can help tell those stories?
No, I think you're dead on. I mean, this organization, while its direct lineage is relatively short, and this is probably another aside that I don't need to get into too much detail. There's, just like with the patches, there's your official lineage, which in LCMC's case only goes back to 2012. And essentially at that point, it was, created from thin air, so to speak. It's not a direct continuation. It didn't inherit the official lineage and honors of a previous organization, because we had multiple organizations rolled into one at the time, and they didn't want to be seen as favoring any particular one. And these were the ones that, most people know about if you're in the organization. The old Electronic Systems Center up at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts, the Air Armament Center down at Engle in Florida, and of course the Aeronautical Systems Center here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and a whole host of other organizations. But essentially in 2012, those previous organizations ceased to exist, and LCMC was created in their stead, but we didn't officially inherit any of the, the previous honors that they might have received. There's not a direct lineage that we can trace back, to those other organizations. It's a discontinuity, to use a mathematical term. That said, there's what I think of as the functional heritage in history of those units. Yeah, while we don't directly tie there, clearly the mission and the functions that those previous organizations used to do, we're still doing. So, as a historian, I like to lay claim to all of that previous activity and the people who were doing that activity. And if you see my virtual background, sorry for the people doing the audio, you can see the inside of a hangar with some biplanes. And this is McCook Field, one of the original two bases here in Dayton, Ohio, that was created in World War II. Or World War I, I'm sorry. See, it's what we talked about with the editing. I have to watch out for the misstatements. But McCook Field was one of the two original bases here in Dayton that was established in World War I. And that one was originally for kind of the research and development and what became the acquisition function. So a really important organization that was only there for 10 years before it moved over here to what's now Area B of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but was then called Wright Field. But the point is, they were doing the same functions that LCMC does now. They were establishing the need and requirements for new airplanes. Okay, do we need a new pursuit plane? Do we need a new bomber? What are these new capabilities that we need from industry? They were the ones that were putting out these requirements and then assessing what industry had to offer and letting the contracts to produce these different. Well, they were testing them first, and then putting out the contracts to actually buy these airplanes and then improve and sustain them. All the same functions you see now. 100 years later. And so that activity is certainly very much a part of our heritage. And so all the people that have been involved in that activity over the last 100 years, whether it be Billy Mitchell or Jimmy Doolittle, these big names that a lot of people should know about, had a piece in of the acquisition process of the LCMC mission. And so there's certainly a claim on providing a link from what we're doing now to these guys. And so the people that are here, can look to luminaries like them, and of course, many others, throughout the years and at all the different organizations, to say, hey, these guys did some cool stuff. And so, we're doing some cool stuff here. They can be proud of, their heritage in the organization. So yeah, that's something that's really high on my priority list to do in the future. And there's no shortage of these people. And in fact, many of them and their stories have been recorded. They just haven't been disseminated, to use a piece of that mission statement again, in recent years, and as much as they could be. And so we're going to look for new avenues, to do that through the history office, through public affairs, and through the organizations themselves. What are ways we can engage with all these other organizations to get those stories out there? And I think that'll serve a valuable purpose for everybody. And it just shows, some of the things that history can do. And it's not just, like I said, sitting in an ivory tower writing some histories that nobody's ever going to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, like, some of the other units, or specifically AFRL having their own pioneers, that they have done a good job of telling some of those stories. And LCMC, from a functional standpoint, and this is kind of goes back to almost to a conversation that Kevin and I have had, and that I had with with some other folks that were in LCMC and AFMC. that there's so much overlap with LCMC and AFRL and some of these organizations, that it's a lot of the same characters. It's the same cast of characters that are involved in, from a functional standpoint, that there's so much overlap that there's a lot of the same people are involved in a lot of different, a lot of different aspects of, weapon system development and stuff like that. I mean, you think about like Bernard Shriver, for example, who was, typically you think of him as a space guy. Everybody thinks of him as kind of like the father of Air Force space program, or space, development, but he was a weapon systems guy. He was kind of one of the founding fathers of, the concept of a weapon system, of really kind of bringing that, codifying some of the stuff around that. And so he was very much, a forerunner to, some of the missions, aspects of the mission and functional responsibility of LCMC. So you have a lot of those guys out there that have, kind of been running in these circles, but we've not had really an opportunity, as such a young organization to say, hey, this we have kind of, I don't want to say we have a claim on this individual or their achievements, but it's some of the, from a functional standpoint, we're as AFLCMC involved in a lot of that stuff, from a historical standpoint. So like Kevin said, it's all out there, it's all been recorded. It's just it's going to be up to us, I think, to package it and present it in a way that conveys that message and that story to our own folks.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that they faced in their time are the same challenges that we'll face today, and so it's good to go back and look and draw lessons from things that they did that were successful, and maybe things that they did that weren't so successful, and try to learn something from that. So
yeah, that's learning from that's the job of history. How can we relate those experiences that these people in the past have to what's going on today, and how can we maybe avoid some pitfalls or leverage what did work well back then. And that reminds me of a great point that Jason made. So much of this history of these different organizations does have a significant amount of overlap, and the AFRL LCMC connection is a perfect example. For so many years during the past century plus, it was more or less the same organization. The labs weren't separated. McCook Field was a great example. It was the engineering division. It did both functions. It had this sort of experimental research piece. Yeah, we're developing technologies, but they also did all the acquisition. The head of McCook Field for the longest period of time, this gentleman named Thurman Bain, he in fact was essentially triple hatted out there. He was heading up the labs at McCook Field. He was also the guy deciding what airplanes we're going to buy. And to top it all off, he founded what's now the Air Force Institute of Technology, and he headed that too. So he was, he had the academic piece, he had the research piece, and he had the acquisition piece. And so he really, kind of put all three of those organizations on a footing that continues to this day. And while, you don't see that level of influence in the same way, later on, there are certainly many other periods in time at which, LCMC and AFRL predecessors were the same organization, whether that's something like the Wright Air Development Center, for example, in the 1950s, it's a perfect one where you have the weapon systems that Jason was talking about. You might have somebody, just throw a name out there, like Bill Lamar. He's this guy that is one of AFRL's luminaries. He was in what they call flight dynamics. He was this really brilliant aerodynamicist guy, but he also was the chief engineer on the Dinosaur program, the X-20, this manned space plane that we were going to do in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And so you saw both pieces. You'd see these lab guys involved in these program offices, and the flip side of that too, you'd also see the program offices handling the contracting part of these research and development activities, particularly the X-planes, like the F-15 is another great example. And so there's a lot of this, symbiotic relationship going on at these different points in time. So yeah, like Benny Schriever or, Thurman Bain, these other people that had a profound influence on both types of organizations. So yeah, we can bring their stories out and use that to educate the modern workforce in terms of what was done in the past.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I think it's going to be really very interesting, and I think people will enjoy those stories. We're just about to the end of our time. I want to, before we go, is there anything that we've left out or anything that we should add in to this? Again, this is just kind of an introductory episode, so to speak. Our plans are that we'll have many more engagements going forward to help tell some of these history stories. But for today, is there anything that we've left out?
Well, I know we've covered a lot of bases in terms of the general understanding. To build on one of Jason's points, it's going to be important for people within LCMC to recognize the history office's presence and the importance of what we do. And through means like this, hopefully we can get our message out and increase the visibility of the history office and our functions. And then on the flip side of that, I want to make sure we also engage with the public more than what we've been able to do in the past because of personnel and time constraints, where we can put a lot more history and heritage out to the organization and on social media and these various paths that you guys have paved for us. And so anybody listening to this, keep an eye out for that, whether it be on, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. We've got several relevant Twitter handles that, we're putting information out, and we want to ramp that up as soon as everything's caught up for us, which, is still a process, but, we want to make sure we get that message out. And that's, something that's very important to me and kind of one of my charges as I'm coming in here to head up the, LCMC history office. So anything else for you, Jason?
No, I better not go into anything else. Asking historians if there's anything else to talk about is kind of a dangerous proposition. So I'll let the sleeping dog lie, so to speak.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thanks again for joining us today on Leadership Log, and look forward to talking with you again very soon in the future.
Great. Thanks for having us, and we look forward to participating in more things like this with you guys in the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Daryl. Appreciate it.